why. Maybe he's having problems with his. Kirk, can you hear us?
Hey guys, can you hear me? This is Kurt.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry. I'm super remote and struggling with Bluetooth. Do we have everybody, Marion?
Yep.
Yes, we do have a quorum.
Okay, well, let's get going then. Let's call the meeting to order at 4:03 p.m. And if we can go to item 2, approval of minutes from the July 20 meeting. Anybody have any amendments or changes for the minutes from July 20th?
This is Joe. I do not.
Sometime in the future, I'd like some additional background on a few things that Brian Huntsberger chatted about the interbasin. I'd like to get an update as to where that's at. It's at the end of the summer, it'd be all functional. I'm just wondering if it was. And the raw pipeline assessment for Lake Marion, the sedimentation basin, I'd like to get updates in the next meeting.
But you're good with the minutes otherwise, right?
Yes, fine.
Okay. Yeah, and they'd made an announcement. The interbasin came online last week, I think it was. So excellent work by the team. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the minutes as published then?
I'll move to approve the minutes as published.
Okay.
This is Joe. I second.
Thanks, Joe. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that's approved. Excellent. Okay, let's go to item 3, public participation. Public participation enables the public to address the commission about an item that is not on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission, please state your name and address for the record. The Arizona open meeting law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item which is not listed on the prepared agenda. The commission members may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. Public comment should be limited to 3 minutes reading time. So do we have any public participation today in the chamber or online? I can barely see the chamber. Is there anybody there that stepped up to the mic? I've got like a postage stamp video feed.
So it doesn't look like there's any comments from the public, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, then we will close out item 3 and move on to new business, which is item 4A, the Watershed Alliance for the Rio de Flag resolution. And Ed Shank is going to present some information on that. So thank you, Ed.
Go. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Ed Shanks, Stormwater Section Director. Just following up on, I believe it was last month's presentation that was provided by one of my staff as well as by Rick Miller from Friends of the Rio for the Watershed Alliance for the Rio de Flag plan and the draft resolution to City Council. I believe you have received comments from the city manager on some of the concerns with that. Staff recommendation at this time is that we table it until we can work on some of those considerations, mostly with the draft resolution. There's some language that needs to be cleaned up there. And then probably some of the critical first projects as well that was put out as a memo that I believe is also included in this list. I should provide a little bit of background here if it wasn't provided last month, and apologies I wasn't here last month. From the staff's perspective, the real value of this plan, this outside plan, external plan, is twofold. And one is the ability to get new grants or new grant opportunities by having this watershed plan. And then from the stormwater section perspective, there is also the possibility that we can get credit with FEMA. So with FEMA, we do have what's called the Community Rating System, so CRS, and that gives discounts on the National Flood Insurance policy. So currently we are a Category 5 community, which is, it's kind of like golf. The lower you are, the better you are. So 10 is essentially you are not fulfilling any of the CRS objectives. One is, well, I don't know of any ones out there, but one would be your superstar in FEMA's eyes. The best in Arizona is a 4, and that is Maricopa County, which, as some of you likely know, has several hundred employees in their flood control district. So having a 5 is actually very good. It gives us a 25% discount on our NFIP, so our flood insurance policy premiums. One of the objectives within there, it's a very large handbook like everything with FEMA, is a watershed master plan. So having a watershed master plan does potentially give us credit under activity 450, which is floodplain management. So that is one of the other benefits to potentially having this plan, is additional credit in the CRS program. So with that, I'll take any questions, but at the moment, the staff recommendation is that we put this on hold until we resolve some of the outstanding questions and concerns.
One quick question. So this is all started with grant, what is it, a water?
Water Smart grant through the
Yeah.
Bureau of Reclamation.
And what is the size of the grant? What's the term of the grant?
Seeing as it's not a city grant, I do not know the answer to that.
And also, Mr. Chair, if it pleases the commission, I know we do have City Manager Greg Clifton here. If there's something you would like to share, if the commission would allow, we can make that available.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think just so Greg and Ed understand, one of the things that at least myself and I think other commission members were concerned about was that we don't end up with a group that has sort of somehow control over the water department's funding or mission or priorities, because Shannon and the team have enough to do as it is. And we want to make sure that things are very aligned and that we aren't getting into something that could potentially drag us off the main priority. So so we think Ed going back and quantifying that, further qualifying the priorities is a smart move. And if the city manager, Mr. Clifton, has some comments, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you to the entire commission. Yeah, I would characterize, I sent you a detailed letter and try to include a few excerpts just by way of example of items that we, would give us cause to want to revisit the drafting of this, mostly, the formative documents, the resolution and so forth. But I also want to state and reaffirm, because I'm sure it's been stated before, the staff embraces the idea of the alliance and the good things that can come of it. We see that. We know that there are a lot of very positive underlying intentions behind this. It would be a strong collaboration. I have been involved with watershed coalitions back in Colorado and found them to be of great benefit. So with that as a backdrop, I see this as just hitting the brakes for a short while we can refine some of the draftsmanship on this, a little bit of wordsmithing, and I'm confident that we can do that with the advocates and get back in front of this commission with a very good product, and frankly, queue it up for the city council. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'm here to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for City Manager Clifton?
So would this be brought back to the Water Commission with the modifications and so forth?
Yes, and I I don't want to speak for others, but on my end, for sure, we'll make it a priority. We know that this commission is anxious to see this, so we'll get it back to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, I
I'm not
just,
sh-
I
Go ahead.
appreciate the comments that you gave on it. And I, just for people's information, that I think there was a lot of really good stuff in it. And there were just a few things that caught my eye, kind of in alignment with what your letter stated, but the Water Advisory Board and its potential role and ability to control things made me a little nervous. And then Friends of the Flagstaff Rio is a sponsoring agency. That agency can change without the approval of the city, even though the city's accepting this resolution. And if the Water Advisory Board is in place too, it just kind of, it seems like things can change without, without the greater community understanding what's happening in that change. So those were just some things that I noticed, but I like the overall content of the thing. I think it's a good step forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners.
Any other comments on the topic? Mariana, do we need a motion to table this, or can the sponsoring party just pull it back and table it?
Yes, we do need a motion because it is on the agenda and in the staff summary.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I would move that the agenda item for the, sorry, my computer just died. I would move that the agenda item for the Watershed Coalition be tabled so that staff can work with the group and city council to refine the initiative. Can I get a second?
Burr Dilday, I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dilday. All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any opposed? No. Okay. All right, so passes. Thank you so much, everybody. Now we will move to item 4, which old business there is none. Move to item 6, which are informational items, 2 from the chair, commissioner staff. We have a strategic plan update from Lisa Dean. So Lisa, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commission members. I'm here to just give you an update on the strategic plan. Last month I was before you talking about the report to the Water Commission for calendar year 22, and within that report is an update of what we've accomplished and what challenges we have by objective for our strategic plan. The strategic plan was originated and worked on in 2019 and adopted in January of 2020. It was kind of a parting gift from our longtime director, Brad Hill, and to be used as a guidance document of the 10 most important issues facing our division. The 10 objectives were in order of priority, with data and standards at the very top. Over the 3.5 years, since this plan was implemented, many of these objectives at least have begun to be discussed, such as the Wildcat Hill, wildfire threat, stormwater system, and while others, such as water quality, communications, or water resources, were kind of already in pretty good working order, and we're just continuing our work. I think most of us would agree that objective number 10, the workforce issues, should somehow move up to the top or close to the top of the scale in our need. But the past 3 years have logged a lot of change. We entered 2020 with COVID shutting the city down and allowing only really core activities and what was absolutely required to move forward. So new initiatives and new objectives were kind of put on hold until we knew, responsibly so, but it kind of hindered our movement. Leadership from January 2020 to February 23, we had 4 interim directors. We lost our engineering director, we lost our section ops directors. Nothing is in a bubble, and our utility reflected those issues. 2021, we're getting our feet a little bit more underneath us, however, the effects of the museum fire really started to hone in that we needed to do something on the stormwater system from the rains in that summer. The public outcry demanded response. At that time, water reclamation needs were also coming to the forefront. Staffing was becoming an issue as people working from home were finding different ways to work, and there was a lot of resignations across the board, across the country. Supply chain issues began popping up by the end of 2021, and in 2022 they really caught up with us. So we spent most of 2022 really identifying what the new norms are. What is our new flow modeling? If the old system doesn't work, how does it work now? What about supply chains? What about purchasing? And what is that going to look like in the future? So the impact on fire in the watersheds really gave a lot of movement toward a bond support and toward getting the stormwater utility, the stormwater section, shored up and funded up to do the things that it needed to do. And stormwater rates were also approved, which also helped shore that up. Our biggest wins in stormwater, SCADA, and reclamation, I would say. The asset management system, our GIS, CMMS, was really instrumental in managing the response on the museum and then subsequently the pipeline and the tunnel fire and the flood events that followed. It really showed the importance and the value of having. They've been really struggling to keep people or to hire people and get them to stay in SCADA. People leave for better jobs. Spruce wash improvements supported by the federal, state, community, they really pulled together as shown in Prop 441. There was 26 million for spruce wash, for stormwater, and 29 million for water reclamation, and we're working through that. You'll be seeing an update on those projects in the September and October blogs this year on where the money is going for stormwater. So now we're focusing on priorities, resiliency, reliability, quality, all those age-old base core values are coming back, and we're addressing those. Examples I can show you, water production. They leverage our resources. When Lake Mary started to overflow, they immediately took steps to start ramping up production from having a very low lake and relying on groundwater wells up to full production. And they got up to 40 to 50% of the water demand this spring. Supplying that is one of our cheaper forms of water. Interbasin pipeline, Hunter, and our engineering team really worked together. They got the third break done. That pipeline is back in operation. We released a blog last week on that one. We're really proud of being able to supply and infuse our interbasin water, which is our finest water and our cheapest water, back into the distribution system with the remaining flows that we'll have for this year. Redundancy, capacity, they're coming back up to the forefront. We're picking up and finishing projects such as Schweitzer Canyon Phase 4 and Solier pipeline upsizing. That's going to help the overall system. Water quality monitoring is really coming to a forefront across the country, across the state, across the region. We are looking at new PFAS samplings, UCMR5, it's a new ruling that's come out to look at samplings and looking at the water content, and the lead and copper research rule. We're trying to get ahead of those and make sure that we know exactly what's going on, being on the right committees and knowing what's happening at those times. So tomorrow's challenges, and we always have lots of those. Planning for the future. We still need to move on our master plan. for the reclamation plants. That's something that still needs to happen, but we're buying time and we're taking care of some of those issues. Recharging infrastructure maintenance program. We know we need a sewer system assessment, treatment facility needs. It's time to go back to those core needs and see what we need to do to address them. Part of that is probably going to be incorporated or considered in how we go about that as we move through the rate study. We want to complete what we started, Spruce Wash series of projects. I know that they've bundled them together and they're getting ready to do a CMAR. I don't know the details, but it's happening, and it's happening at a pretty fast speed. The Schultz Basins and that Schultz Creek was almost unprecedented time for a federal agency to really act that quickly in a response to keep people from flooding. And to my knowledge, they have not flooded this season yet. Well, I won't say that. I'm hoping they don't. Okay. We finished communication towers. We still have some to go, but all of those objectives that were out there in 2019 that we said we needed to do, we're slowly working our way through those. And the reclamation bond projects are in design and getting worked and into our system. At that point, there's going to be a workforce development. We're finally hiring and putting people back into those key positions, especially leadership roles that we really needed to make these projects and these objectives move through and to hold that level of standard. We have our water reclamation manager, we have our facilities treatment manager, our director. We're filling positions, even we're filling operator positions, and that's encouraging. However, there's going to be training needed. So now we need to move our emphasis over to training and making sure that that our staff has everything they need and the training they need to do the best job that they can. We've added 6 new positions in FY 2024, which is a good amount. Half of that was in the new stormwater plan, but they just spoke with Patrick today, and he says, yeah, but we're getting all these trucks. Where are we going to put all this equipment? So you solve one problem, there's more to take care of, but we're not afraid of that. Updates through 2025. I just finished a series of really brief meetings going through with the managers of each of these objectives that have a finger in it. Somehow it impacts on what progress they could make between now and the end of 2025. We know what we've already done. We've already can eliminate some of those. What do we still, what can actually happen? So we kind of set a little roadmap. It's more of an internal document. We're not going to revise the original plan. The original plan is still fine, but we're going to focus a little more with emphasis on things we can actually do that are measurable by the end of 2025 to complete that plan and then look toward what our next steps would be. And with that, I'll take any questions.
One question, do you anticipate the plan to be completed in 25?
To have it all done? No. This is not a work document. It's not a capital plan. There's no money behind it. It's our assessment of what we need and how we work toward it. So it's more of an overall organizational document that we use as guidance. What are our missions and goals? What are our biggest needs? If we have to spend money, what is our top priorities? So that was really the more intent of this plan.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, how many positions are there total in the water department, and how many do you still need?
89, 95, there will be 95. I think with the 6 positions, we had 89. And how many are filled? Well, they were just this morning in a meeting talking about how people accepted positions. So give me a week and I'll answer that question for you, because it'll be a happier number. It's succeeding. We're filling those spots.
Right. But even currently, there are currently 19 vacant positions within the division. And of those, 15 are actively being posted, and we're in the middle of five in the hiring process. But 19 is the number for the vacancies.
That's super.
Thank you.
Thanks. A little related question for Director Jones. Shannon, you talked about the facilities master plan. I may have the name wrong, but what's the rough timing on that? And does that tie into that document at all? Or is that that's a completely separate document, right?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it is a separate document, so we are looking to issue the facility master plan. I will say currently that is on my desk. It's been under review the last couple of weeks as I try to get up to speed with what the request going out is. It is in my intent. I want to work with procurement to release that by the end of the month. But to answer your question, that is currently on my desk.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions on that point? Okay, if not, we'll move to item 6B, rate study update from Aaron Young. Thank you, Aaron.
Good evening, Commissioners. Erin Young, Water Resources Manager. And today we have a introduction of the water rate study. We have with us a number of Stantec professionals working on the study, and we'll go ahead and introduce the team today. We'll run through the study components. They will provide some early work, just comparisons of where our residential rates fit with other like communities. And we'll revisit the policy strategies that you all helped us develop over the years. And with that, Stantec will be sharing their screen, their presentation. Carol is our project manager, so I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Thank you, Erin. And good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. It's with great pleasure that we come and talk to you tonight. We haven't met any of you yet, so this will be the first time that you'll get to meet any of us, and we'd like to first talk a little bit about Stantec and ourselves. Can you see my screen, first of all? Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to start with me, Carol Molesky. I'm going to be the project manager for this rates and fees study. And as the project manager, I've been working very closely since May with Erin on all of the tasks that we are going to be completing. I'm actually located in Cleveland, Ohio, but over my 25 years of experience in the water and wastewater industry, I've worked primarily in Colorado and New Mexico and in Ohio. So I've got a range of experience across the United States, and I've participated in many, many different committees and industry with industry guidelines and industry documents, such as the American Water Works Association and Water Environment Federation, and the Green Infrastructure Manual out of WEF. We also have just a number of other people that I'd like them to speak about their experience, but I'm happy to be leading this team. However, our main leader and the director of our financial services group is Andy Burnham, and I'd like to turn this over to Andy.
Sure. Thanks, Carol. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Andy Burnham. I lead our management consulting group here at Stantec, and I'm serving as our project director, just providing guidance and oversight to the team and the conduct and delivery of the study and making sure we're using the methods of best fit for the circumstances. So I've been working predominantly in water and sewer rate making for a good 22 years now, and I'm presently the chair of the Management and Leadership Division of the American Water Works Association, which oversees the Rates and Charges Committee, Financial Accounting and Management Controls Committee, and several others. I'm also a member of the Technical and Educational Council for AWWA. And so in working with that organization, you know, myself as well as our team, we've done quite a bit. So we led a 2019 water reuse cost allocation and pricing method survey that was a national study to identify some practices and trends in water reuse making that is now going into an updated edition of the Principles of Water Rates, Fees, and Charges, and one that'll be coming out here in about a year or so that I've also been working on. I've also assisted with other rate making manuals for small systems, a capital financing manual that should also be out at the end of this year, beginning of next year, and done quite a bit of teaching actually in rate making for various universities, such as the Institute of Public Utilities at Michigan State University. I've done a lot of work throughout the country for small systems, for towns and communities of just a few hundred customers, to a present rate study we're doing with New York City called a sustainable rate structure analysis, where they serve about 850 to 900,000 customers. And so presently I'm working quite a bit actually in Arizona, and have been over the years. Started really with the town of Gilbert and then Peoria. And then we're presently working on studies with Surprise, with Queen Creek, as well as yourselves, and providing ongoing support to communities like Tempe, as well as Phoenix. So, and I'm personally involved in all those studies as well. So I'm just really happy to be here and continue to be very present in Arizona, and to help the city tackle a lot of its challenges and help address those in a way that's consistent with your objectives and policies. So really looking forward to getting to know you and getting a better sense of your objectives as well. But with that, let me turn it over to Tim Hancock and let him talk a little bit about himself and his role in the project from a public outreach perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, and good evening. I'm Tim Hancock with Stantec's Public Outreach and Engagement Lead for this project. I'm already working very closely with your talented staff to kind of create and implement a broad-based, informative engagement platform that is designed not just to inform, but also to educate throughout the process. We see every public touch point as an opportunity to inform and educate, and look forward to working with your staff very closely to achieve that. I have more than 3 decades experience in planning and public outreach across a variety of sectors, but predominantly in the water and energy sectors. I present regularly at regional, state, and national conferences on how to best design and implement effective engagement strategies. I have worked with our team on several rate studies and dozens of public information campaigns, and have the pleasure of working with regional and national clients, and really look forward to working with your team to execute this project. With that, certainly happy to answer any questions at any time, but I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Zach.
Thanks, Tim, and good evening, commissioners. My name's Zach Cook. I'm working as the lead analyst on this project. I've been involved in utility rate studies, pilot pricing studies for water, economic and financial feasibility studies with the Bureau of Reclamation. I've been working in the industry for about 2 years, and I have worked on roughly 5 rate studies in Arizona, Colorado, and Nebraska. And really looking forward to working on this project with the city. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Audrey Barber.
Thank you, Zach. Good evening, everyone. I'm the supporting analyst on this project. I've been in the consulting world for about 3 years, and I just joined Stantec in the greater industry last year. So I've been here for a year now, and I'm working with all of your data and within the models and asking Carol and Zach lots of questions.
Thanks, Audrey. We also have Rob McCandless. I think, Rob, you're online as well. I saw you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Rob McCandless. I with Stantec now for about a year, but I've worked with City of Flagstaff since about 2014. My first projects was for wastewater collection system master plan, and led the advanced water treatment feasibility study a number of years ago, and then another water reuse part of the overall master planning effort for water reuse. And yeah, and I'm pretty much really kind of the client manager for Flagstaff. You know, any of the needs and any expertise that we need within the company, I'll go find it for you.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks, everyone. I'm going to move on very quickly to a set of slides, as Aaron mentioned.
Keep asking all those questions, all right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Will do.
Thank you. Now I'll move on to our set of slides. And what I'd like to do is run through the information that we have to update you on where we stand with this study. After I'm finished, I'm going to go back to some of a particular slide about the strategies that underlie this whole study. And I'd like you to feel free to ask questions and make comments, and we look forward to having a discussion with you in a few minutes. So let me get my little laser pointer here. Okay. Our general scope of work that we are following for this rate study is pretty typical for a rate study. However, we have a lot of elements where we are talking with you and your stakeholders. So we started the study in May, and we were talking first with your leaders of the team. So we met with Shannon Jones and Aaron Young, and we, over this, just the past couple months, we've been starting out on the technical tasks of the study. Right now, we are here in task 2. This is the 10-year financial plan task, and we're working on three different financial plans, long-term plans for the water system, the wastewater system, and the reclaimed water system. We're working not Aaron and Shannon, but also with Rick Tatter and Lisa Deem. So we're working on financial information as well. So we've gathered a lot of financial information. We've had quite a few meetings with them. And I'm going to talk a little more about that task in a minute. The outcome of the financial planning task are the annual revenue requirements that we will use in task 3, the cost of service analysis. If you've been through a rate study before, you know there's a lot of work behind this task where we take those annual revenue requirements and allocate them across the functions of your utilities, then ultimately to your customer classes. So we are looking at where are the cost drivers and where should the cost be recovered. So once we get that information, we could move on to rate design. And I think that's where you're probably all curious as to what rates will result or what rate options do we have once we get through this task. That's task 4. Task 5 and 6 are the outcomes of the study. So we have a rate model. We don't want to just do the work and walk away. We want to leave your staff and your team with tools that they can use for the future. So that's the rate model task where we train your team on use of the models and the tools. The reporting task provides the documentation. We all love rate study reports. We all refer back to them. So we want to make sure that our documentation is complete and completely documents the assumptions, the options, and all of the information that we gathered during the study. Task 7 are the presentations. We have a lot of presentations. We will be meeting with you regularly, at least once a month, but then we also have a set of presentations near the end. So we're going to be, throughout the study, we're going to be gathering feedback from you and from City Council and other stakeholders. And then we're going to ultimately arrive at the recommended rates. Our target date is adoption and implementation of the rates in September 2024. So you will see a lot of us over the next 12 months. In general, the rate study process answers 3 primary questions. How much revenue is needed each year for each of the funds? From whom do we collect this revenue? So what are the classes of customers that we're going to be covering the costs? And then how do we collect these revenues? This is that rate component. So these 3 tasks are going to be completed during the whole study. How much revenue you need is also called a revenue sufficiency analysis. And this is where we incorporate all of your financial policies, your financial targets. That's what we're working on now. And we look at alternative funding mechanisms and alternative funding approaches for all those capital improvements that Lisa mentioned that are needed as a result of your strategic plan. The second main question, from whom do we collect this? This is that cost of service task. This is where we're looking at traditional allocation methods. So we're not making anything up. We follow utility accepted approaches. We go by the book in this case. So we're looking at defensible methods to allocate costs across your customers. Finally, how to collect. This is actually one of the areas that where we move beyond the book and we look at your unique characteristics. So we look at the city of Flagstaff's unique needs, your customer usage characteristics, and your goals to come up with simple, equitable, and sustainable rates. This is really important that we spend enough time and getting enough feedback from you on this step. When we began this study in May, we had some deep conversations about the policy strategies that were outcomes of the last rate study. So your team compiled feedback from you and from council and other stakeholders to find out what do we really want to accomplish and what are our overarching strategies for this study going on now. These strategies each relate to the technical tasks of the study. We are going to come back to this slide because I'd like to come back and talk to you a little bit in more detail about these strategies. But in general, you can see I'm not going to read them because we'll come back to them, but overarching guidance for our study. As I mentioned, we're in task 2, the 10-year financial plan development. A brief overview of the goal of this study is to make sure that we are accounting for the city's and water services operating and capital funding needs, that we prepare alternative plans of rate adjustments, and communicate the cost drivers for each of the funds through this process. So far, we have analyzed a lot of data. Lisa has done a lot of work. I have to give a shout out to Lisa for all the work that she has done to provide the base budgets for us, the forecasting that has been done. Your financial team has been instrumental in getting us up to speed on your financial targets. So things like debt service coverage ratios and reserve fund balances. All of these elements are important to include and to understand and compile together in this financial planning task. At the end of the day, we are going to arrive and come back to you with a series of scenarios because there are many alternatives. We will start at the do everything scenario. So all of your needs, all of your capital funding needs, and all of your staffing needs and your operational requirements. And then, of course, oftentimes that scenario is not feasible from a rate perspective, so we will come back with different scenarios for you to consider. So we're still in process with this task. We are nearing completion on this for our scenario analysis, and we will come back to you soon on the next step. That being said, I'm going to back up a little bit to one of our initial tasks, and this is a subtask to that first overarching task. Benchmarking is a process that a lot of utilities prefer to do. They like to say, where are my city's rates and monthly bills compared to other peers? So this benchmarking task or rate survey has been completed for where we stand today. So this is current year 2023, fiscal year 2024 for you, but it is an analysis of your wastewater and water bills and capacity fees. I have a series of charts that I'd like to show you, and then we can come back to your questions. I want to start at a point where we look at a bill comparison or a rate comparison. In general, water and wastewater rates across different communities are difficult to compare for a number of reasons. As you can imagine, these are the caveats. Rate structures are different. Customer classes may be different. You will have different system requirements, whether you have aging infrastructure or a newer system, or you have a groundwater source of supply or a surface water source of supply or a combination. Whether your customers are university customers or they're aging communities, whether you are in a mountain town or in the plains. So there's all of these different elements that are unique to different communities, and we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at comparative rates. However, for this analysis that we're going to be talking to you about, when you look at these communities that we're going to show their comparative rates for, just keep in mind that we identify these communities not just for regional similarities, but for customer characteristics such as a university community, a mountain community, similar operating revenues and populations. So these are the types of reasons why we have selected these communities for you to review. Our first comparison is for the water bill. A typical single-family residential user in Flagstaff uses 4,000 gallons of water a month. For that 4,000 gallons, no matter where you are on this list, these are the comparative bills for one for 1 month. So you'll see that we range from Tempe here at the lowest end all the way to the Pacosa Area Water and Sanitation District in Colorado. So great difference, just a reminder, great difference in the types of utilities and in their needs, but you'll see that some of them do have similarities. Some of these are in Colorado. St. George is in Utah. Bend is in Oregon. So we have all of these different communities, but they have similarities as well, as I mentioned. The average water bill for 4,000 gallons across all of these communities is $32.88, and Flagstaff's current bill is just a little higher than $30, so right just under the average. We separate the component of the bill into a base charge, or that charge that doesn't vary with the amount of water being used, and the usage rate component. So that's the part, or the blue part, that does vary based on the amount of water used. Digging into a little bit more detail, and we could always come back if you have specific questions about these. Each of these communities, with the exception of Bend, has a tiered rate structure. This is indicative of a water conservation-based methodology where you have an increasing rate for increasing amounts of water used. The different colors represent the different tiers. So the orange tier would be the very first tier for the smallest amount of water use. But you'll notice that not only does the rate vary across these communities, but the amount of water included in that tier varies. So we could show this a million different ways, but the current chart just shows you the rates per 1,000 gallons of water used in each of these tiers. Flagstaff has a pretty typical inclining block rate approach. You have 4 tiers for your rates, and you can see that some communities have more and some communities have less. So in general, it ranges between 3 to 4 tiers for each of these communities. When we switch over to wastewater is a little more straightforward. No tiers for these customers, but we have that same mix from the majority of customers between a base charge and a volume rate. Your current wastewater rate structure does not have a base charge. So you only have a usage rate, and that usage rate is just shy of $20 for 4,000 gallons. The average over this sample is $32.58, pretty comparable to the average for the water rate, which is interesting. The methodology that each of these communities might pick to set their rates is very much dependent on their cost recovery goals. So you'll see St. George and Surprise currently have just a base charge, so no volume rate at all. And then look at Durango. They have almost a 50-50 split between the base component of their sewer bill and the usage component. So we could talk for a long time about these utilities, but in general, you'll see that currently your bill for 4,000 gallons of water use on the wastewater side is at the lower end of the spectrum. To point out for wastewater bills, how do we get wastewater bills? We know that we meter water usage. On the wastewater side, a proxy for the water that gets returned to the wastewater system and to the treatment system is a winter water use. So most of these communities in our sample use winter average billing, and so do you. So Flagstaff uses the bills for December through March to average how much water goes and returns back to the sewer for the purpose of calculating wastewater bills. Not everyone does that. St. George and Pacosa area both just bill straight up for water used, not any winter average. The rest pretty much have a winter average. And some communities even determine that not 100% of the winter water used doesn't always return back to the sewer. So they have a return flow factor, which just means what percentage of water used goes back into the sewer system, and these customers are billed accordingly. In total, if you add together a single family residential water and sewer bill, we have an average over the sample of $65.46, and Flagstaff is currently right under $50 a month in total. So lots we could talk about here, but in general, it just gives you an idea of where your bill's standing in relation to the survey. The last thing I'd like to talk about is the capacity fee discussion. Capacity fees are really important for growing communities and communities that are expanding their capacity. So as the name indicates, the capacity fee is a one-time fee for new connections to the system that covers the cost of a unit of capacity needed for that new customer. These types of fees make sure that new customers pay their way or pay their share into an infrastructure. And we calculate these capacity fees based on one of three methods that are indicated by or directed by the water and wastewater industry, so American Water Works Association, Water Environment Federation. We're going to go into that when we do the study for you, the capacity fee study. It's part of the cost of service task, and we've already started that. So we will look at the alternatives for calculating your capacity fees. The water fee currently is just over $6,000 for a new connection, and that's a 3/4 inch meter. And the wastewater is just under $3,500. There are some differences, as you can see, across the sample. So we have many different methodologies, just like water and wastewater rates. We have different approaches for these different communities. Some use a square footage as an additional component for different lot sizes. So there's lots of different components that you can add to your capacity fee calculation. They all should reflect the cost of a unit of capacity in the water and wastewater system. Finally, I'd like to give you something to look forward to. We have a lot going on. As I mentioned, over the next year, we're going to be meeting with you regularly. The orange color is more of the stakeholder engagement, so your outside customer, outside stakeholder engagement. But in general, you'll see that right now, we're here in August. Our next meeting is an introduction to City Council. So we have not met with City Council yet. We're going to meet them on September 5th. But we have regular meetings set up with you and with your stakeholders so that we could keep everyone up to date with these tasks and where we stand each and every step of the process. That was a lot of information, and I'd like to go back to the policy strategies, but as I mentioned, you probably have a lot of questions, so please, we are open, our team's open for some of your feedback.
Thanks, Carol. Anybody have questions for the team?
This is John. I have a question. Currently, we have residential tiered rate structures, and I'm guessing that you have plenty of experience with commercial, non-residential rate structures, and I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yes, Commissioner, we have discussed that a lot, and we have looked at commercial tiers for water users. As you can imagine, it's a little more complex because commercial customers have a wider variety of usages. So you have different types of commercial accounts, you have different meter sizes, and you have different usage patterns. But tiered commercial rates is on our list, and that is something that we are going to be reviewing and presenting for you.
And I might just add too, if I could, Carol, I think, the other thing to keep in mind is there are other approaches that could be considered for conservation rates, such as maybe seasonal rates that we've seen used for non-residential customers in other communities that, may be another approach to consider in addition to tiered rates or, perhaps in lieu of, because of the points that Carol mentioned. It's a pretty diverse customer group in of itself, ranging from, single-story retail shops to car washes to banks to big box retail. So having an inclining block or a tiered rate structure that works well for that type of a broad customer group can be challenging. So there may be alternative rate structures that you could consider that maybe look at seasonal rates or how you could maybe think about adjusting those tiers to try to account for that, maybe scaling them by meter size or other factors. But there'll need to be conversations about just understanding what data you have available and just what your technology in terms of your billing system is able to do.
Hey, I got a question. This is Joe. Are you guys seeing trends in either the base versus usage fees? So with more water conservation, inherently, if you're more in the usage fees, your total cost is going down, but your water system is still expensive. So are communities switching more to a base fee that you're seeing?
It's interesting. I would say just in Arizona, a lot of the questions that we're seeing, that relate to that, Joe, are more on actually the wastewater side and moving more like Queen Creek is looking at, shifting more to a model like what Surprise has, where it's, more of a fixed fee on wastewater. But again, thinking about conservation and ways to enhance that on the water side. And so that's something that we're actually talking about with Surprise. So it kind of depends on which, kind of utility system that we're speaking to. I'd say the trends are more towards fixed and kind of simplifying on the wastewater side. But on the water side, it tends to be a bit more of a balanced conversation because of the conservation dynamics and wanting to make sure that we're having an adequate price signal for that. And also reflecting kind of our marginal cost of new water supplies and just how much more costly they are as compared to, some of our existing ones.
John here. I have another question. How do you take into account the future use of DPR as a water source?
So that for that cost of that, we are running some scenarios in terms of the cost of that type of capital investment. So that's going to be one of our scenarios to see the impacts moving forward. And I think it's to be determined. So we have to look and determine, how those costs will change over time and how the funding could play out. Some options for funding the treatment plant. So it's going to be one of our scenarios.
Yeah. And in addition to the cost, the allocation of the costs gets very interesting as well in terms of the distribution of the cost of, getting to that type of a scenario, and where do you draw the line between what's needed and necessary for treating wastewater effluent versus, at that point at which it becomes part of your water supply portfolio, and how do those costs get allocated between your service types and then ultimately between your different types of customers. So the good thing is, as I mentioned, we've done that reuse pricing and cost allocation survey, and we've seen some good examples, particularly in California. They've already kind of tackled this question and challenge in terms of the allocation, like in San Diego with their Pure Water program. So we've got some good examples to look at and lean into, but it's a great question because, in fact, this is a kind of a policy question that's come up right now in real time with Queen Creek in terms of how they're allocating some of their reuse and recharge costs between the sewer system versus their potable water system.
This is Malcolm. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Kind of follow up on Joe, but maybe, so the tiered residential rates, just an observation that if they're intended to curb the use of water for extensive green lawns, just an observation that they don't work. People around here just water, and just my opinion, I'd like to see something financial put into place to where they might consider getting rid of their grass. And right now, the current tiered structure has no effect on these folks. Just an observation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got one. So I guess Carol, Aaron, Director Jones, as we look 10 years out, we've sort of had a discussion based on the master plan, that facilities plan that will be coming, which should allocate new capital needs and the reasons for those needs, i.e. how much are we going to have to handle on sewage? What do we think we need to produce for reclaimed? What might we want to produce as DPR as a vision? And there's some very large capital requirements coming. Is that going to be in the best case, I'm not sure if that's the best case or worst case, but the all-in plan, let's call it. So are those the kinds of numbers that go in the all-in plan, or is that larger facilities capital even outside of that plan? I'm trying to understand that.
In terms of the financial plan for the next 10 years, we have an all-in plan that we are still refining. So, there are some of those larger projects. We're determining where in the timing they could appear. So if you're looking within the next 10 years, that's probably, if you want to call that the worst case, that would have the largest impact on your users today, of course. So with Director Jones, we are working through those alternatives so that you could see the impacts of those larger projects.
This is John. I want to tack onto something Malcolm just talked about. I found it interesting that we use winter rates to set the sewage treatment fees. So what are cities doing in terms of looking at that summer usage, that peak for irrigation, and how are they trying to use those numbers to decrease that use?
So I could maybe give you an example just by speaking to, what's been done in Tempe. So in terms of, they're a pretty data rich community in terms of they've got good GIS data about their properties. They have advanced metering infrastructure, so they've got really good usage information down to even, hourly and I think maybe even 15-minute intervals. And so, with that data, what we've kind of done is an analysis to say, well, what's the statistical distribution of lot sizes and doing sampling of what's the actual amount of irrigable area that they have, and looking at the distribution of that to say, well, if we look at what the rainfall and real irrigation needs are after considering beneficial rainfall for those property types, we kind of use that to set logical breakpoints on the tiers for outdoor irrigation. Indoor obviously is based on consideration of household size and indoor usage requirements, but that data is really helpful to kind of help communicate publicly what's the right level of water that we need for the typical types of properties that we have in our community. And then with that, through the cost of service process that Carol kind of described at a high level, we're also able to identify, well, what are the cost of capacity that we have associated with meeting those peak demands during those maximum days and in those peak hours, and actually showing with that data in those tiers, how each of those tiers is contributing to those peak demands that we're having to secure all the water supply facilities and treatment facilities and distribution network for, even though they don't occur year round, and really helping kind of connect that understanding of the demands that drive a good portion of our capacity related cost and how we're going to tie the rate structure to the cost of those. So when you exceed those typical levels for those irrigation amounts, you're really going to receive that strong of a price signal. So I think Tempe did a really good job of trying to use data-driven approaches to understand what is needed and communicate that to the customer base, but then also to take that same data and identify how that's really contributing to our cost to make sure that kind of connection or nexus, if you will, is really there and is pretty transparent.
Do you have enough data to do that in Flagstaff?
We're going to have to do some more research on the billing data side to see what we can get
Audrey's
to.
on that. Yeah.
So, each community is a little bit different in terms of what they have available, but fortunately, we do have some good other utilities that we can lean on from their data. In fact, we just completed with Tempe a wastewater return flow and sampling study, strength study. So we've got some really good data that, to the extent that we have some gaps here in Flagstaff, we do have, some other agencies that we can look to get some of the same data to arrive at reasonable assumptions to leverage the data that you have and kind of extrapolate where we need to based upon what we've seen with some other communities.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions?
I guess just one more. From from our old rate study, there was a large discussion about where you draw the boundaries between reclaimed and wastewater and how you deal with that, and especially in the future, how that will affect DPR. So how do you address that issue?
Well, I think there's one of the things that I would like to do is, share some of the benchmarking data that we have on that. So we've done a significant amount, and in fact, we're going through a stakeholder process right now with the city of San Diego and all their large users to actually develop a very detailed framework of how and where that line is drawn for the different types of facilities and costs to make sure that they're being allocated appropriately. So I think the first place I'd like to start is, sharing the different options, the pros and cons of each of those options, to then, be able to have an informed discussion about what makes the most sense in Flagstaff, given some of the context of the system in terms of how we've gotten to where we are and where we want to head. Because the answer is not necessarily the same from what we're seeing from each community to community. There's certainly a lot of policy and community objectives that come into play in terms of where we're drawing that line, if you will, makes sense, for each respective community. It's not necessarily always the same place.
All right. Any other comments, questions?
Just a request, the PowerPoints presented today, will those be available?
Yes, Marianne commented that she'll make it available, and I would like to try to promise you materials in front with the agenda so you can review them in advance. We'll do our very best to always provide materials with enough time to review. Anything else, Chairman, or any other questions?
Nothing for me. One last call for questions, comments. Just the main comment is we've got a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a great process, and we're very happy you all are here to support and guide and provide feedback on what we need to do, because it's going to be a lot. And we have a lot of folks in different groups in the public we really do need to outreach to and make sure they understand what's the thinking, the strategies, so that there's no big surprises at the end and we end up with a bunch of disruption. So it's going to be critical we pull those folks along with us throughout the whole ride. So
that's in my opinion, that's very well said, and we're happy to have the opportunity to work with you and the community to work through that process.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you all for being on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Stantec.
Okay. Aaron, anything else you wanted to present on that topic, or is that going to wrap it up for you?
That wraps it up.
Okay, thank you. Then any other informational items from Chair that were on the agenda?
Yeah, this is Malcolm. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just noticed that Gary Miller no longer works for the city. I got an automated response when I replied to something. Maybe it was a Marion thing, but yeah, I just wanted to say, well, I wanted to ask first, is that right? Gary no longer works there?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say a word. I wanted to say that I worked with Gary for over 20 years. He was always very professional, and beyond that, he was a good person, and I'm going to miss him. So I just thought I wanted to say that. Thank you.
You're here.
Thanks, Malcolm. I didn't see that. Okay, well, with that, why don't we move to item 7, which is adjournment at 5:11 p.m. And as usual, Marion, thanks for all the minutes from last meeting and this meeting. And thank you for all the staff on Ed and Aaron and Lisa for presentations. And we look forward to the rest of the summer and not too violent monsoons in the next 2 weeks. So here we go. All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Kurt, I do have one question.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
And maybe I can just talk to Ed about this. I need to understand better the culvert system at 180 and Schultz Creek. I've had neighbors asking me, and I don't know if I can give them a good answer. So if you can inform me so I can inform the public, I would appreciate it.
Would you like that right now or as a one-on-one?
If we have the time.
Sure. So actually, your commissioner to your right probably has better answers than I do. But we do try to keep all of our projects up to date on the web. So we have both the Pipeline Fire West webpage as well as the Museum Fire webpage that has all the updates for what we publicly share. But with that said, we'll say the culvert situation, just a brief answer for Schultz Creek. The ADOT has put in their temporary mitigation, so that's their temporary repair, which is quite a bit larger in terms of mitigation than what was there before. So before was a box culvert that went to a 48-inch CMP that went down to a 36-inch CMP. So there's two bottlenecks within there, at least two. The new temporary mitigation is the same as before. They replaced their 48-inch that was leaking, but with the addition of a new 48-inch as well that goes from that box structure to the Rio. So essentially we have a whole new conveyance of 48 inches, which gives us, Joe know better than me, but I think it's about 200 to 250 CFS of additional capacity that we didn't have before. Which was quite a bit, seeing as we have the basins upstream that are metering out the flow. So we are meeting most of that 2-inch and 45-minute flow, so the 25-year storm with it. Not all of it, but we're meeting quite a bit of that. And then the long-term mitigation that the city's working on, which we hope to construct by the spring, would take the entirety of that 2-inch storm. So roughly 700 to 800 CFS in the new conveyance.
So right now we're at about 400, 300 CFS?
For the culvert right now, no, we're roughly, and Joe, you know better than I, but we're roughly 200, 250, but feel free to correct me on that.
Yeah, so with the 2-inch storm and the basins in place, I think it's reaching 180 is about 270 CFS off the top of my head. And then once it gets into that pipe, that flow, some of the flow splits between either the 48-inch that goes towards the Nirvana and then the other 48-inch that goes down to the Rio, and some still overtops on 180. So I forget off the top of my head the exact flow in each one of those, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and again, this is all modeling. So we're getting in the weeds here because it's one design storm, it's one hydrograph. So I mean, a lot of people kind of forget that we're not predicting the exact CFS from any particular storm. And one other comment that I forgot to mention here, the city did get ADOT to agree to put a temporary plate on that 48 that goes down towards Stevana. So it is plated at 36 inches, which is the same conveyance that we have at what we call that bubbler structure. So if it does overtop, Joe had a little nuance there. If it does overtop, it will not be overtopping where we've seen it before at Northwood Apartments. It'll be overtopping actually at 180. So it is a slightly different flow regime than what we had last year.
I guess what I'd like to see is kind of a regular, when we're in the monsoon, what we're looking at. I mean, we have a flood watch for tomorrow. And so I had a neighbor come by yesterday and says, hey, what do you think? What's going on? And I says, yeah, I'm not really sure. So yeah, that helps. It's a better situation than we had, but not quite where we want to be. And so you're saying the next project to get up to 750 CFS would be in a couple of years, probably for completion?
No, we're hoping to get that done this spring. So we're fast tracking that. Most of that will be paid for out of a state appropriation. So the Chamber of Commerce was actually very successful, and with backing with City Council and City Management of getting $8.9 million out of the state budget process. And a portion of that will be funding this particular project.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. I don't think we have any other issues or questions. And with that, we can adjourn the meeting at 4:16. So thanks, John. That was good to get that out there to everybody. So thank you, everybody, and I appreciate all the information and hard work.
Good night.